In this video, we're going to focus on the material from chapter 12. In this chapter, we're going to look at two forms of the classical period. The first is a theme and variation, and the second is rondo form. Theme and variations. So theme and variations is a very popular form that emerges in the classical period. And we'll see this form definitely in the second movement to symphonies and piano sonatas. We also see this form as an independent form or independent piece as itself. Okay, so in a theme and variations, each repetition of the melody is altered. So we'll start off with a theme, and it's usually a theme that's very, very popular or something that people can identify with. And then they'll present the theme, and then each variation, they're going to alter that theme. Maybe they're going to change the mood from major to minor. Maybe the variation, maybe they'll play it twice as fast or twice as slow. Maybe they'll add more articulation to a theme. Okay, and the variations will change throughout the entire piece. Okay, we'll look at Mozart's piano piece, which is basically a variations on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Okay, it was written around 1781, and it was written for solo piano. And the piece starts off with a solo piano melody of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and then after that we'll hear subsequent variations of the melody. So let's go listen to the melody now. So let's listen to the Mozart's variations on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The theme is going to sound like this. I'm going to play it again so we're familiar with it. So the first variation, what Mozart's going to be doing is he's going to be kind of doodling around in the right hand of the melody, where he's playing the melody, but he's playing notes above and below the main notes of the melody. Let's listen. In the next variation, he's going to be playing the melody again, but in the left hand, we're going to hear a very, very active bass, okay, or an active figuration in the left hand. And this figuration is also called an Alberti bass, which is, we talked about that in a previous chapter. Let's listen. Variation number 3 is different now. In the right hand, we're going to hear arpeggios or broken chords that kind of outline the harmonies, and then we'll also hear a couple of kind of grace notes in there as well. Let's listen. Again, it's a very, very animated variation. Now, continuing, the fourth variation is different. It's going to have a lot of arpeggios or those broken chords, but instead it's played in the left hand while we play the main melody in the right hand. Let's listen. And finally, the fifth variation it's a little bit different, where it has kind of a call and response between each of the hands. Let's take a listen. So that's the overview of Mozart's theme and variations of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So let's go back, and I want you to log in on Canvas and listen to the entire piece now. It's going to start with a theme, and it has these 5 variations, but the entire piece is going to have 12 altogether. So listen to the entire piece, and then listen for the other variations. How does Mozart? How does he change up the melody? How is it like the previous 5? How is it different? Now, continuing talking about our theme and variations, we're going to talk about Franz Joseph Haydn, and we're talking about his Surprise Symphony. Okay, the Surprise Symphony is his 94th symphony, and it was a symphony that premiered in London, and it was very, very popular amongst its premiere, and it was due to the second movement of the symphony, and the second movement of the symphony is a theme and variations. So we have here, in a quick newspaper review, Herr Haydn, the darling of our nation, whose gentle character is marked by each of his pieces. His compositions have beauty, order, clarity, and a fine, noble simplicity. Okay. Now, this was a newspaper review, and it was a British newspaper, because Haydn at the time was working and living in London, and he wrote a series of 12 symphonies during this time. In his time in London, and these symphonies became nicknamed the London Symphonies. The people of London loved him, and his music was celebrated during this time. So we're going to look at this symphony, but we're going to look at the second movement. And as you may know, if we look at this, we see all symphonies have 4 movements. The first one's always in that sonata allegro form. The second one's going to be a slower movement. The third movement is going to be your minuet movement or your dance movement, and then the fourth one concludes with either sonata allegro or a rondo form. So the second movement, if we see in bold, it's going to be the form is going to be the theme and variations. Okay, so we're going to hear a theme and we're going to hear 4 variations after this. The mood, it's a very lyrical mood, and the tempo is slow. And traditionally, a symphony in the second movement, the tempo is going to be slow. Continuing talking about the Surprise Symphony, the second movement, it's a slow movement. It's marked andante, which kind of means kind of like a walking pace. Now, the form is a theme and variations, and Haydn was one of the first composers to use a theme and variations for a movement in a symphony. Okay, and keep in mind, when we have theme and variations for a symphony, it's a little bit different than writing for piano, because you can have your main theme being played, but you can change up not just how you write the theme, maybe it's more active with the right hand or left hand, but you can change up the instrumentation, you can change up what instruments are playing, so you have another complete aspect that you can change, which is regard to instrumentation or timbre. So at the first performance, the audience cheered after this movement and demanded it was played again. And so they loved it. It was basically, they wanted to hear it again, kind of as an encore. And it really, really kind of stapled, it put this symphony into, it being one of Haydn's most popular, most famous. The theme is basically, it's a simple A-B theme. I'm going to play it in a minute. And one thing I'm going to talk about real quickly is the nickname of Surprise Symphony. The theme gets its nickname because in the second movement, after we hear the theme being played, towards the middle of the theme, you have this big loud crash on this dominant chord. And one of the things that Haydn loves to do, he's a jokester. He likes to make his symphonies about certain things. And people kind of nodded off in the second movement, so they stopped paying attention. And this kind of loud crash, this loud chord, was a way for Haydn to get people's attention, to grab their attention, and so forth. And it worked. People loved the symphony and loved this movement of it. So the first theme, the first A section, sounds like this. Very simple. The melody kind of outlines this tonic chord, and then and dominant chord. The second half of the theme, a little more lyrical. Let's listen. So after we hear the theme, we hear that low crash in there and so forth, we continue on and we're going to hear 4 different variations of this theme being played. So the first one is the melody's played in the strings, and we have like a violin and flute kind of counterpoint above it, playing against the theme of variations. Let's go listen to that. That will continue on. And then we get to the second variation. Now, the second variation, we have a shift from major to minor. So it's going to be very, very loud and fortissimo, and it's going to be in a minor key. The second half, it kind of ventures off a little bit to a different key area. So let's go listen. And then we get to this third variation. Now, the third variation, we go back into a major key, okay? And the variation is going to be playing the melody. You're going to hear it in the winds, particularly the oboes, and you're going to hear kind of repeated 16th notes. So instead of doing bum 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 bum, it's going to be bum 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 bum, and it's going to be staccato, which is being short. Let's go listen. Continuing, we'll have the fourth variation. Now it's very heavily ornamented. There's a lot of movement with the strings. Let's go listen to the fourth variation. And then finally, we have a coda to wrap everything up, kind of bring everything back to like a nice close. Okay, so that's the second movement to Haydn's Surprise Symphony. So let's go back, log into Canvas, and I want you to listen to the entire movement throughout. Okay, listen for the theme, listen for the surprise of that big crashing chord, and then listen to each variation and try to identify each different variation and what's different about the melody. The second one's going to be in a minor key. The third one's going to have those repeated notes. The fourth one's going to be very, very ornamented. Rondo form. So this obviously is a very popular form in the classical period, and we normally see this form in the last movements with piano sonatas, with the concertos, with symphonies. It's a great way to kind of wrap everything up. So the kind of framework for the rondo form is going to be an A, B, A, C, A kind of section, okay? Basically, we're always coming back to this A section, okay? So there's at least two contrasting sections. Probably one of the oldest musical forms. We encountered this in the Baroque era. If you remember, we listened to the Suite of Symphonies, the rondo from the Suite of Symphonies by Moreau. So it's a simple style through Haydn and Mozart, often included in, has some transitional or development writing. Okay. Typically, rondos are very, very jovial. They're quick and they're light, and again, they're coming out at the last movements of either symphonies or concertos. I believe Beethoven's piano concertos, all five of them, the last movement is a rondo. Okay, and if you look at this picture here, you'll see you kind of have the terrace of this castle that we'll consider the A. Okay, the middle section would be B. We go back to an A section, and then this middle section, it's different than the B section, so it's a C section, and we go back to A, B, and then A again. So we have kind of a visual example of what rondo form is. Continuing talking about rondo form, we're going to look at the Trumpet Concerto by Franz Joseph Haydn. Now, the Trumpet Concerto is probably one of the most important concertos for trumpet of the classical period. It's a very, very famous piece, and it was a very challenging piece for trumpet players to play. So the last movement is the finale. It's wrapping everything up, and we want to wrap everything up with a kind of upbeat, joyous piece, okay? And if we see here, in the forms with concerto, would they be sonata allegro form? But with the concerto, it's going to be that kind of double exposition. The second movement is going to be the slow movement. You have a ternary theme of variations. The third movement, though, of a concerto is going to be the rondo or the finale. Okay, it's always going to be a fast kind of piece. Okay, the tempo will always be a quick movement. A side note, most concertos in the classical period, they're only 3 movements long, okay? Unlike the symphonies, which have going to have 4 movements, concertos omit that minuet or that third movement, okay? Continuing talking about Haydn's Trumpet Concerto, okay? Before I play the examples, we're going to talk about the trumpet that Haydn was working with during this time. Now, if you look over here, you'll see this, this trumpet on the picture of the trumpet, and you're going to notice that there's no valves or fingerings for this trumpet. And prior to 1800, French horns, trumpets, they were called natural instruments. There's no valves. Okay, actually, so it means basically you're playing, and you are limited to how many notes you could play with your instrument. Okay. Like with French horns, if you wanted to change to a different key, you needed to have more tubing. You'd have to actually take your French horn apart and add what was called a crook and put it in. So again, before they've had valves to instruments, the instruments were limited. Okay, limited in range and how many notes they could play. So with this piece that Haydn's writing, if it was played on a traditional trumpet, it would have been very, very challenging. Okay, it's pretty accessible to be played with modern day trumpets with the valves, so it want to make sure you understand why it was so difficult to be playing this piece on what we call a period instrument. With that said, the third movement, it's in this rondo form, okay, and it's a great kind of boisterous, upbeat piece, okay. The piece, if you look down here, it's going to be in a kind of a quasi-rondo form, and I'll explain this to you. So if you look down, you have A, B section, okay, A, B again, then you have this A, C, A, B, A. And if you remember, as I said, rondo is going to be usually A, B, A, C, A, B, A. That A is going to alternate. The orchestra comes in first and plays this A section, and then will play the B melody, presents it for you. And then they're going to repeat those 2 sections again. And when the orchestra comes back to play those 2 sections, the trumpet player or the soloist is going to be playing the main melody or the main melodic material. He's going to present it. Okay. When the trumpet goes and plays that same melody or the same melodic material, he's going to play either a variation or a more ornamented style of that melody. Again, which it gives the concertos it's kind of life. The orchestra is going to play the melody, and then when the soloist comes in, they're going to play the melody too, but they're going to spice it up. They're going to add more ornamentation to it. Maybe they'll play some more arpeggios around the melody. It's all about, again, concertos are all about showing the virtuosity of the soloist. Now, without further ado, let's go listen to the main theme. The A theme is going to sound like this. Again, you can hear it's very, very lively. It's upbeat. That's the first part of when the orchestra is playing. The second half of the B section is going to sound like this. Now, once the orchestra introduces all the material, the soloist is going to come in and play the main melody. So let's hear the A section again, played by the trumpet. Okay, it doesn't give you we don't have the example of the trumpet playing the B section. The C section now, it goes from being this boisterous, lively material in a major key and moves to a minor key. So let's listen to that. Okay, so that's an overview of the third movement to Haydn's Trumpet Concerto. So again, let's go back, log into Canvas. I want you to listen to the entire movement and try and recognize each different section of rondo form. Okay, so this concludes Chapter 12. We talked about theme and variations, and we looked at Mozart's theme and variations for piano, where he sets the melody Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. We also looked at the theme and variations for a symphony, and we looked at Haydn's Surprise Symphony. We listened to the second movement of that Surprise Symphony. And then we discussed what rondo form is. And our example for rondo form is Haydn's Trumpet Concerto. It's the third movement to Haydn's Trumpet Concerto. Thank you very much for listening, and please tune in and let's for Chapter 13.